We've got a 2-hour session today, and my name is Jackie McEwen. I'm Program Director at the Business Renewables Centre Australia. And welcome to this first session in our series of renewable electricity procurement for small to medium business buyers. First of all, I'd like to thank the City of Sydney, the City Switch Program and Sustainable Destinations Partnership for having us present this series to you. Today, we're also really delighted to have a guest speaker from Domain. She is the Sustainability Officer at Domain who managed the GreenPower procurement purchasing process. That's Sophia Sotrifer, who has kindly agreed to come and share her company's experience in purchasing GreenPower. I'm also joined by two very important members of my team here at BRC. John Prendergast, one of our technical directors, who will co-present with me, and Alex Nasser, our project officer, who is bravely taking care of our technical. So to get started, every week more and more organisations, public and private, large and small, are looking to buy renewable electricity motivated by both cost and sustainability drivers. So who are we? We are the Business Renewables Centre, if you haven't come across us before. We are Australia's leading organisation for off-site renewable energy purchasing, especially via corporate power purchase agreement. And we provide guidance and education. We're established with funding support from the New South Wales, Victorian and Queensland governments, and ARENA, which is the federal government agency for renewable energy. And we are a not-for-profit organisation. So we provide training, guides and templates, information on markets and policy, and importantly, connection for organisations looking at renewable energy procurement. To date, we've helped Australian industry to contract 1.8 gigawatts of renewable energy, directly enabling 11.2 gigawatts of renewable energy generation. This is mainly via corporate power purchase agreements from large companies up to Woolworths and Westpac type size last year, right down to smaller companies. Just moving along to the next slide then. Just a really quick snapshot of our homepage there and our buyer's diagnostic tool, which we're going to visit a little bit later in the session. We focus on ways of purchasing renewable energy that are generated off-site, as I mentioned earlier. So in searching for greener and cheaper energy, many companies will start by looking at their energy efficiency and then at on-site or rooftop options, rooftop solar options. Where these are exhausted, or in the case of on-site or rooftop not being an option, especially for a lot of office-based organisations, their main options are for off-site renewable energy. Just on the next slide there, then just giving you a little bit of an overview of this training series. So to cover the main off-site renewable energy options available, we've developed a series of training sessions on the how-to of these options for small energy users. So today's session will cover the simplest of these options, which is GreenPower and LGCs. We will also be running sessions on renewable retail power purchase agreements. There'll be 3 of those sessions, and we've got those on the dates. Those dates just listed there on the screen. These tend to be for companies using more around sort of 1 gigawatt per hour of electricity per annum or more, but have been used by some companies as small as 300 megawatt hours per annum. So the size of your electricity procurement matters. It's not the only factor, but it's an important one. So if you know your electricity load size already, which is, I think we popped into the invites to ideally check that out before you joined, you'll find this session a little bit more helpful, but don't worry too much if you haven't. So in this webinar, just onto the next slide there, our course goals. So in this webinar, we are going to take a closer look at procuring renewable energy, focusing on these, and it is a 2-hour session. So it's quite comprehensive. Actually, buying GreenPower can be really quicker than that. But it's what you do in the background before you make your purchase of GreenPower LGCs that takes a little bit of time, and it's worth doing for a few reasons. And we'll come to those in a minute. So you will have received workbooks that we've put together containing information to support you on both during today's session and such as the explainer there, and following the session, such as our business case template. We'll also go through that in today's session. The session is being recorded for the benefit of those who are unable to attend today, but this won't include our group breakout sessions, which is where you'll probably learn the most, and there'll be some good sharing, so it's worth sticking around. All polls and exercises are anonymous, so we do this really to facilitate the sharing. Questions at the end, ideally, but if you do have an urgent question, pop it into the chat. I can see that I've almost made some accidental chat there on my computer. So that's that. So moving right along. So first to our quick poll. So we're just going to run a little bit of a poll just to understand, I guess, what best describes your organisation. So we have a few options here. So that you may in fact be, and we've popped the poll up there, you might be totally new to renewable energy procurement. You might be currently investigating options, which is probably likely because you've attended, and want to know what's the best option for you. You might be tendering or negotiating. You might have executed a contract for LGCs or GreenPower. So if you could please just pop your answer in there, and that will help us to gain a little bit of understanding around the group. Fantastic. So it looks to me like the vast majority of the group, 53% of the group, is actually investigating options, or that's dropped down with a few more. A few more in the totally new to renewable energy procurement category. So that's great. We've got a few at the upper end who've already contracted for GreenPower, and you're probably looking at some of your alternative options there. So that's fantastic. Thanks very much. I'll just close that out now. Thanks for your answers. If you could bring back the sharing screen, please, Alex. So why do organisations buy off-site renewable energy? Just the next slide there. Thanks, Alex. There are lots of reasons why organisations do this. The top three that we list there really related primarily to the environmental sustainability types of goals. So some organisations will make net zero commitments, others will just want to reduce emissions and potential future carbon liabilities, and manage that long-term carbon risk. One of the great things about buying off-site renewable energy is that you can avoid the capital costs or the cost associated with putting solar or solar systems on your rooftops, and obviously delivery risks for organisations. And for a lot of organisations, that's also not possible. It's also helpful in terms of positioning your organisation if you want to be a sustainability leader out there in the market, and strengthening your corporate brand. And finally, supporting your investment in renewables and local communities. Some organisations are really motivated in that space. So on to the next slide there. So I've just got a quick question. What do I mean by offsite? It means that you're not generating renewable energy on your site where your operations are. So you don't have solar or wind on your office location. So you're buying it from a location elsewhere, either directly or via a retailer or a broker. Good question. Thank you. So just jumping on to the next slide there, achieve emission reductions. So achieving emission reductions, it's quite obvious that a lot of organisations are doing for this particular reason. GreenPower and LGCs can very quickly make material contributions to achieving your renewable energy goals. So while many corporates have made incremental improvements to things like their energy efficiency in this graph and that rooftop solar, so when you're looking at what you're doing on site, GreenPower and LGCs can then make that substantial emissions reductions in one contract. Moving on to the next slide, LGCs. So these are large-scale generation certificates, and my colleague's going to go into these in a little bit more detail shortly. But if you have bought or are looking at buying LGCs, you will have realised that the price of these certificates fluctuates quite a bit, both day to day and year to year. So as more companies look to buy LGCs, the more scarce they become and the prices go up. So companies that look to decarbonise their business long term can estimate and that can estimate what their sort of carbon will be in the future years, might look to buy these in strips or over a longer period or a longer term contract to lock in those lower prices. You can see those prices dropping off on that right-hand side graph. So we'll cover more on these long-term contracts a bit later in the session. Finally, as I mentioned, another important factor for many companies are what we call project social and environmental co-benefits. So in addition to producing green energy, some solar and wind farms not only avoid negative impacts in the region where they're located, they also contribute positively through things like biodiversity projects, education, and community funds and those sorts of things. More companies are buying LGCs now. More companies that are buying LGCs now are recognising that this represents a real opportunity to align their purchase with corporate social responsibility goals that they might have for their own organisation. So where you can buy LGCs that are linked to a solar or wind farm project or multiple projects, it is possible to identify these benefits and share them in your company's collateral. So that's an exciting opportunity for a number of organisations. So I'm just going to jump into another poll now. And it's really important.
Pretty fucked, isn't it?
Just getting a little bit of feedback there from someone who might need to, if you could just mute yourself. Thanks. What is important to your business? Really important question at the start of this process. You don't have to labour it or spend a huge amount of time in it, but working out what's important to your business helps you understand what type of procurement that you should be looking at. So it might be things like keeping up with your competition. You might have a directive from the top. You might be the top and decide that you're going to create a directive for your organisation to go 100% on renewable electricity purchasing. You might want to be the industry leader. Maybe your industry hasn't really looked into this much yet. You might also be an internal champion. So you might be a sustainability or procurement manager or just in, in a sort of an accounts role or marketing type role. And you really want to sort of drive this in your organisation. And then another benefit is really staff engagement. So a lot of feedback from organisations who do this say that their staff are really motivated by their organisations procuring renewable electricity. So Alex, if we could pop the poll up, or Alex or Jade, we've got a little poll here and a list of drivers there. If you could just select ideally the one, but if you must, the two drivers, even three that are really kind of the top drivers for you. And we'll share those results.
Jackie, it can be interesting how some of these processes, some of them start as a directive from above, whether it's a subsidiary in Australia that's part of a multinational or just the CEO or board member says that we should go renewables. And how others start from below, don't they? A staff member can initiate it, build support, and switch everyone to GreenPower.
Yeah, so that sort of top down or bottom up approach that Jonathan mentions there. It's a real mix in organisations. For us, it's traditionally been more of the internal champion side, but more and more it's a top down. So we're kind of quite split. The most popular answers there being industry leadership and net zero commitments, followed by a directive from the top. So that really does align with what we've been seeing more recently in organisations. So that's fantastic. Thanks. We can end that that poll now too. And I'm going to follow that poll with another poll on the next slide. Our third exercise, which helps us understand the group a little bit better, again, anonymous, to understand what is the biggest challenge then for your organisation to switch to renewables? What are your current company barriers? Could be things like you haven't prepared a business case or not too sure where to start with one. Time and resources. Energy expertise might be a bit of a problem. Lack of peer examples, so there might not be that many in your field that are doing it, so it's difficult to hold those up as examples to your decision makers. You might just be busy with other priorities, so that can be very much the case. And then also there's a lack of industry imperative in some cases. There are some interesting suggestions coming through in the chat there, which maybe we'll be able to visit later. So just popping up that poll again, this third poll, just to understand what your key barriers and challenges are. Someone mentioned that we didn't list carbon reduction there, but I think it was definitely highlighted as, I guess, encompassed really in that net zero commitments as carbon reduction. Okay. Getting a little bit closer there. So still building the responses. Thanks very much for your participation. It helps us to focus on particular topics as we move forward through the process.
It's very informative to us to understand all the participants just that little bit better. And the lack of business case answer is quite popular, so I'm glad we've focused on that in our materials and the session today.
That's right. Yeah, so it's a really interesting split. Lack of a business case is quite a popular answer, about 20% there. We've got expertise in energy being a challenge, and this is something, one of the barriers that we've been reporting on for some years at the Business Renewables Centre. We're seeking to address that through a number of guides and also our training. Not everyone's an energy expert, and most people don't have the time in their daily roles. Time and resources being the other one that's really popular here, and then other priorities. So a lot of organisations really just need to get this done and move on to other tasks. So thanks everyone very much for your answers. Complexity, that's another one. I guess it can roll a little bit into a few of those. Someone's mentioned there, so thanks for your inputs there. So it certainly can seem complex, but to break it down into its more bite-sized parts, I'm going to hand over now to Jonathan Prendergast, our Technical Director, who you heard from just now, to give a little bit of a snapshot of GreenPower and LGCs and the different benefits and limitations of these. Take it away, Jonathan.
Thanks so much, Jackie, for all that, and thanks everyone for participating so well in those polls and the chat. Hearing from Sarah that its complexity is another reason why things haven't progressed in her organisation. But the time and resources and the lack of priorities, I know the feeling where sometimes you're trying to get it on the agenda to get it moving and it gets bumped off due to more pressing issues like the core business and so on. So on to this next session to talk through a bit more of the detail, the what and the how. So this diagram is showing GreenPower and LGCs. So GreenPower on the left, how it works, and LGCs on the right. We've got there we are. We've got the participants there, the corporate buyer on the right of each of those illustrations. So they're quite similar models. If you're the buyer and you choose to go GreenPower, you choose a retailer that can provide GreenPower and is accredited to do so. And they supply you with your electricity, your peak, shoulder and off-peak bills, as well as GreenPower on top. To do that, they have to buy these LGCs, large-scale generation certificates, from wind or solar farms, as well as the electricity from the grid to supply you electricity. if you choose to, rather than GreenPower, to buy LGCs directly, and there's various reasons why you do this, and we go into those later, you would buy the LGCs directly and keep your electricity bills and your electricity supply with the retailer of your choice. When we say directly, you might use a broker. You're probably not going to walk down the road to the local wind or solar farm and knock on the door and sign a contract with them and buy some LGCs from them. But via a broker or supplier, or even retailers can provide them separately from electricity. So that's the LGC option in there. Alex, next slide, please. So how does GreenPower work? This might seem very simple, and that is the beauty of GreenPower. It is really made simple for us electricity users to switch to renewables. That's kind of the point of it. So how it works is sign up to GreenPower, a GreenPower retailer, and choose GreenPower at an additional cost. Your retailer buys those renewable energy certificates called LGCs from solar and wind farms, and to match your demand month by month or annually. And this supports more investment in solar and wind power. So wind and solar farms basically have two revenue streams. One of them is selling electricity into the wholesale market, and the other is selling these renewable energy certificates, these LGCs, to retailers and corporates and households as well. Thanks. We have on the right a slide from LinkedIn shared by GreenPower, announcing 3 new GreenPower customers: Ambulance Victoria, Fox Studios, and the Melbourne Cricket Ground. And we have some case studies that we're developing for you all as well on Melbourne Cricket Ground. And there are many companies that are using GreenPower to be 100% renewable and reduce emissions. Sarah asked, why does it cost more? Maturity of the market and lack of competitors. It costs more to generate. Let's get into that a little bit later, Sarah, but keep the questions coming. I'm sure if one person asked a question, there were 5 people that had the same question, so it's great to do. So as I described earlier, GreenPower is shown in this illustration on the left, where you're buying GreenPower from a retailer. It has some benefits and some limitations. So the retailer buys enough LGCs to match your demand, and it's accredited by the GreenPower program, which is managed nationally, but by the New South Wales government. So GreenPower is really an accreditation layer. They ensure that these retailers, if they supplying 100 customers GreenPower, that they are buying enough LGCs from wind and solar farms to match that demand. As I said before, it really is the simplest and easiest way to buy renewable electricity, and it's available from most electricity retailers. And you can also buy GreenPower separately from brokers. Generally, there aren't any transaction or management costs, and generally you don't need consultants or lawyers. And this is where for smaller electricity customers, and when we say small customers, this isn't a comment on your organisation or company. You can be a very large company, just not use that much electricity. But if you're a smaller customer, you really have a competitive advantage in this front, because when large companies go to do this, the likes of Coles and Woolies and Telstra and BlueScope Steel and many other large corporates, they spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on internal staff, consultants and lawyers and so on to set up deals to buy renewable energy and to reduce their emissions. Luckily, if you're a small customer, in electricity terms, not necessarily a small company, you can just switch to GreenPower at a relatively low cost compared to what these others are doing. When you switch to GreenPower, you can immediately reduce your organisational emissions. So electricity is referred to as scope 2 emissions, and these can be set to 0 overnight if you switch to GreenPower. Scope 1 emissions are ones you cause directly, like if you burn any gas on your site, for instance, or drive cars, and scope 3 are emissions by others that you use. So GreenPower is most suitable for smaller corporate electricity users. If you're promoting your brand to your internally to your staff or during recruitment or to your clients and broader stakeholders. Being able to say that you're 100% renewable and potentially net zero as well can help build that brand, and just for staff morale and so on when they go home and say, hey, you know, we're a good company, we're 100% renewable, that can really be good for staff as well. GreenPower is obviously available at home. In terms of limitations, there is less tangibility. You don't have a connection with a particular solar farm or wind farm or the community it was built. You're buying it via a retailer, and it just you may not know where those renewable energy certificates come from, those LGCs. And also it's an additional cost. Yes, Sarah had that question, why is it additional cost? So it's really about buying the separate renewable energy certificate and voluntarily surrendering that rather than selling that. So we know that wind and solar has become much more cost effective in recent years, and as coal power stations retire, will be profitable. But they sell these renewable energy certificates, someone has to buy them and voluntarily surrender them to be able to claim they are 100% renewable. So that's why it comes at an additional cost. Sarah asks, by how much can you totally negate carbon from electricity? I'm more an expert in procurement and contracts for renewable energy, less on carbon accounting, but that's my understanding is if you switch to 100% green power, you are zero carbon electricity. And if you do a carbon inventory, a greenhouse gas inventory for your company, you can set those scope 2 emissions from electricity usage to zero.
That's right. Just to add to that there, I popped an answer there to Sarah. You can go 100% renewable electricity with GreenPower and LGCs, and we'll come to this a little bit more in future slides.
Yep, and Jack writes a good comment in there, and Jackie's responded.
Yeah.
There's a question on neighbours ratings, which is more your expertise, I think, Jackie, or even Jade. Does it have an effect on the building's neighbours rating? You're muted, Jackie.
I'll have to have a quick look at that question. I can't see it at the moment, but we'll keep all the questions for the end and pop back to those if you want to keep going there.
Absolutely. We have some of the members contributing answers, which is great. We
yes.
love to facilitate and help peer-to-peer learning as well. So in terms of LGCs, or large-scale generation certificates, one LGC equals 1 megawatt hour of renewable electricity generation. It's actually close to a tonne of carbon. 5 years ago, it was very close to a tonne of carbon. Luckily, our grid electricity is more renewable now, so it's more like 0.8, but it depends which state you are in, with South Australia and Tasmania having much lower carbon electricity, so that might be 0.5 or even 0.1 tonne per LGC. It's a DIY alternative to GreenPower for buyers who want more control. So if you have a more dedicated resource that can manage this, you have a relationship with a broker, you have more interest in how you go renewable, then it suits those sorts of corporates who want a bit more control, try and find the best price and manage it themselves. You can buy LGCs directly from solar or wind farms, or a broker or a retailer. When you do this method, the large-scale generation certificates are transferred into your Clean Energy Regulator portal. So you have to set up a Clean Energy Regulator account, which takes about 2 days and is not too arduous. And then they get transferred into your account, and you can voluntarily surrender them based on how much electricity you've used that year. You can only do that once per annum.
Just to answer a question, sorry to jump around. There's a question that's attracted some attention on science-based targets initiatives. So we aren't specialists with science-based targets initiatives. Having said that, we are soon to be releasing a meeting your commitments guide that will address how each of these methods of renewable energy procurement can meet those targets, science-based targets, etc. They do change quite often, but essentially my understanding is that they need to be green power in order to be accepted under SBTI, but I stand to be corrected on that. But we aren't carbon consultants. We are renewable energy procurement support services. Just moving on.
Thanks, Jackie. No need to apologise for jumping in. It gets me to rest my voice and have a sip of water. So the benefits and limitations of LGCs, you can buy them directly and have more control regarding price and where they come from. Some corporates prefer the flexibility to keep LGCs separate from electricity purchasing. So we're calling this decoupled, particularly corporates with demand in multiple states. I also think particularly where corporates where procurement have a very strong role on electricity purchasing, if they're like really resisting switching to green power, it might be easier just to do it separately from them, from the environment, sustainability or other team. LGCs can be purchased regularly, like for example, once per annum, or via longer term contracts, say 2 or 7 years or somewhere in between. You can buy LGCs from a nominated wind or solar farm, so you can have a more tangible link of where your renewable electricity comes from. And they can be purchased from electricity retailers or via an energy consultant or broker. We think this option does require more time and management over time as well. So LGCs, buying them from operational wind or solar farms doesn't directly finance new renewables and reduce emissions in that way and create that real direct additionality. But being realistic for smaller buyers, they represent a really good option. So there are some benefits in buying them on the longer term. One of them, Jackie showed a slide before, that we expect LGCs to reduce in price over time. That means green power costs will come down over time, but they do go up and down as she also showed. So if a corporate has announced they will be 100% renewables, that's a public commitment and generally you've got to stick to it. That means you've got to buy GreenPower LGCs for the foreseeable future. That might be the next 5 or 10 years. And if you just buy LGCs for the next year and LGCs say double in price the year after, you're exposed to that sort of fluctuation of price. So buying them in longer term under contract, say 3-7 years, can help you manage that risk. Probably not such a huge issue for smaller electricity customers, but funds and investors that look at large corporates like the Telstras and Coles that have made these announcements, they have a keen eye on whether they're managing that market risk to the LGC market and carbon offsets market. So it can be a more crucial thing to do, and that's what they're all doing as well, is to buy them under contract under fixed prices. Because it's less certain what LGC's price will be in, say, 6 years, 7 years, you can actually get quite good deals by buying them longer. Currently, they're trading at around $40, $44. You might be able to get a 7-year contract at $25 or $20 or something like that. So now to some case studies. The first one we have is the Green Building Council of Australia. Of course, they're going to use green power and be very keen to reduce their emissions. So they purchase green power, but not via their retail net electricity bill. They purchase it decoupled. So they purchase green power separate to their electricity bill. Their driver is sustainability and leadership, of course. In this case, it was 9,480 kilograms of CO2 or 9.5 tonnes for an event they held. This added around 5 cents per kilowatt hour to their costs of that event. They do it for all of their events. And a couple of the quotes there, we usually estimate the annual amount of LGCs we need to cover events and then purchase from different providers to not favour one over the other. It's a key point there that not only are they doing this, but they're celebrating it. So that's an act of leadership, that they're encouraging others to purchase green power for events and more generally. If you buy GreenPower, switch to renewables and don't tell anyone, then we think a bigger part of the opportunity is lost. And you can see that slide they've shared on the right, which markets and communicates what they did for that event. Next case study, City of Sydney, not just because they're hosts, but they're one of the first ones to use GreenPower Connect, and they have used that for their renewable PPA. So they achieved 100% renewables in June 2020 and are targeting net zero emissions for the whole City of Sydney area by 2035. In terms of communications, they're encouraging residents to switch to GreenPower, and they really have to be on GreenPower themselves to encourage others to do so. They signed a retail PPA for renewable electricity with Flow Power in 2020, and that receives electricity and renewable energy certificates from Bowman Solar Farm, Sapphire Wind Farm, and also a Shoalhaven Community Solar Farm down the south coast as well. Next is Suncorp. So they're an insurer. I think their headquarters are in Brisbane. They purchased LGCs from the Sunshine Coast Solar Farm and Reedy Creek Renewable Energy Facility in Burleigh Heads. And they also have a standard retail contract via Diamond Energy. So they got their LGCs and electricity from Diamond, but in an unbundled fashion, separately negotiated. They have a sustainability driver. They were being 100% renewable from July 2021, and being in insurance, they've taken a leadership role on the risk of climate change for their customers and for their insurance as well. They purchase and retire LGCs to achieve this goal. They had a full retailer tender process and contracted around 3,000 megawatt hours per annum. They didn't want to just buy GreenPower because they wanted a tangible connection to the renewable energy projects and be part of that transition and operation of renewables.
Just sort of jumping in really quickly there, just the question, what is a PPA? So PPA is a power purchase agreement. We are covering the retail type of power purchase agreement in the subsequent 3 sessions that we'll be doing. But just so that you know, they became a popular form about 5 years ago and have grown in popularity. They're more accessible by the larger organisations and groups of organisations called aggregations. And so if you want to know a bit more about them, please join those sessions. Thanks, JP. You're on mute, JP.
Both done that today. Someone asked about size before in terms of what scale. Luckily, that's the next slide. So we classify them in this way, and we don't like to reduce electricity customers and organisations and corporates to a number. It's a very important factor on what is the best choice for you in terms of GreenPower, LGCs and other options. So a very small buyer uses around 1 gigawatt hour per annum or 1,000 megawatt hours per annum. So using less than $400,000 per year in electricity. If they were to try and get involved in financing a new wind or solar farm, like what large-scale PPAs do, the amount of wind or solar to supply such a customer would be under a megawatt. So it's not realistic to do PPAs at that scale, generally speaking. So therefore, the main option is GreenPower LGCs, and that supports renewables through creating new demand for LGCs. If you're above that 1 to 25 gigawatt hours, getting more in that range where you can be more substantial to a wind or solar farm and can sign up with a retail PPA. So we've heard of retail PPAs like the City of Sydney one, but for much smaller customers as well, like schools and so on. So that's quite viable. For the medium to large buyers, they get involved with projects that haven't been built yet or financed, and they sign a PPA to help underwrite that finance of a new project and have a more direct role with the wind or solar farm and its finance and creation. Many of you might be tenants in a building or in a warehouse or whatever it may be, and there can be some additional considerations if you're a tenant. GreenPower and LGCs represent really good options for tenants because it's off-site renewables. It's not a solar system you have to install on the roof. So these deals can move with you if you move tenancy, if your tenancy comes to an end, for example. Some buildings have embedded networks, so this is becoming more common. And in those situations, you may not be able to choose your retailer of choice. You probably can, but it's generally more cost effective and easier to stick with the embedded network retailing option. And this is a case where it might be easier to do LGCs rather than GreenPower. In doing your carbon accounting and communications, it might be best to remember that your electricity bills are for your office usage, which might include lights, power, and so on, but not for your base building like air conditioning and other and lifts and other base building things. So it's very important when you communicate exactly your emissions and to define that in your greenhouse gas inventory about how you're managing those emissions. That said, many building owners are 100% renewables, the likes of Dexus and AMP and others. So I mentioned before, for these various reasons, LGC purchasing is often preferred by tenants. One thing to consider is your tenancy term, how many years left on your tenancy, because moving building might change how much electricity you use, for instance. And we note here that if you move to the ACT, in say a building in Canberra, the ACT government has purchased LGCs on behalf of the whole of the state. So you're already 100% renewables if you move there. Also, as a tenant, if your building is not 100% renewables, you can be part of creating that change by encouraging them to switch to renewables, like many of the leading building owners have done. If you buy 100% GreenPower or buy and retire LGCs for 100% of your load, you can say that you buy 100% renewable electricity. Mike asked a question, would you say benefit of buying PPA from purchasing renewable energy from existing renewable sources in LGCs are to support future renewable energy initiatives? Certainly, and that can be part of the choice to achieve additionality, is if you buy them from a company who is very actively developing new wind or solar farms, they will certainly use the financial benefit of you buying from them to help fund their next tranche of projects. So you can achieve additionality in that way. And just generally buying LGCs and GreenPower, that places more demand for them. So it sends a market signal that LGC prices are sustained or go up, that we need more renewables, more wind and solar to be developed and financed. Jade writes, Sophia from Domain has joined, so that's great timing. We're going to hear from her soon and her experience switching to GreenPower, but not just yet. A few more slides to go. So next we're going to do the diagnostic tool. Jackie, this wasn't a breakout session, was it? This was all together.
No, that's right. We mentioned earlier we have a diagnostic tool. If you just flick back a slide there, you should be able to see. You can jump on this anytime. It's free on our website. And by answering a few questions, it will recommend to you whether you buy LGCs or GreenPower or retail PPA. If you're a much larger energy buyer, and that is energy, not size of company, then you can play around with all sorts of other options. There are ultimately 8 options on there, but these are the 3 that we're covering in this session. JP is just going to walk us through that tool now.
Thanks. I'll use the slides first, and I might have a go sharing my screen and showing how I go. As per the earlier slides, we don't like to convert you to a number, but your annual energy consumption is a very important factor for selecting the best option for you. So Van asked a question. If you click on that link that Alex has shared, you can see all this yourself. So first option is to select what size you are, from very small to medium to large. Then that takes you through to the next slide. And that's whether your organisation, what are you seeking? Are you seeking just to reduce costs and manage your electricity prices? Or are you seeking to really push for sustainability outcomes and so on? Either of these is fine. We can't expect everyone to have the resources and capability to achieve the first-class standard. And we don't want being too ambitious to stop you doing anything. So it's important to take some action rather than just waiting for perfect action. So click on that one. We do ask this qualifying question of whether you'd like to join an aggregation project. BRCA keeps a list of organisations wishing to do this, so we can bring them together in the future should a group project, a group aggregation arise. And after that, you just have to fill in your name, email, and organisation, and it displays your preferred options and also sends them by email. So we're showing a slide now, which really just so that's what the results look like. In this example, switch to a greener retailer or go for LGCs. Do a tender for a retail PPA or investigate innovative alternatives such as investing in an off-site solar farm, community solar, or other options. If we go back to that slide with the table in it. So this is, hopefully you can see that table okay. So this is a summary of what options are likely to come out for attendees today. So very small and smaller buyers. So for very small, if you ticked that your ambition is around price, then you're likely to be recommended GreenPower. But if you're going for more sustainability options, you're going to be presented with the option of LGCs and also ambitious self-led options. For small buyers, so 1 to 25 gigawatt hours per annum, GreenPower and retail PPA for less, more price-driven objectives. And we will also include LGCs, retail PPA, and ambitious self-led options if you have ambitious sustainability drivers. How are we going for time, Jackie? Is it worth going through that live? You're on mute again.
Just probably worth switching across just quickly to that website to show people, pop in an example there would be great.
Great. I'll even show it to you. Can I share, Alex? I hope this works. I'll start from the BRCA website. Is that coming through okay?
Yes.
So you don't have to search too far. This is our homepage. Begin your renewable journey on the diagnostic tool. Start here. So start now, and you'll start to see these familiar slides. So I'll do, say, very small and sustainability outcomes. I'm not sure today about joining a group, but I'll click not sure. Put in my name.
Now we all have Jonathan's email address.
Yeah, I've got a few. I'll do my UTS. See your results. In the road testing, I think Alex has had my email just come through a few times. So in this case, because I said very small sustainability, it has suggested, we have suggested, large-scale generation certificates and innovative alternatives. So you'll receive an email if you fill this in as well, and how to get in touch with us to ask any questions should they arise.
So you'll see the results on the screen, and they're emailed to you as well. We won't harass you, but we might follow you up with a call to see if you want any more information. But that's where it will end. And Alex has just popped that link again into the chat. Thanks, JP.
Great. Next, we get to hear from someone that's been through all this themselves. So, Sophia, thank you for joining.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. It's so great to see so many people have come along today. And, thank you to City Switch and the Business Renewables Centre for hosting such an insightful session and inviting me to be part of the conversation. So as mentioned, my name is Sophia and I am the Sustainability Manager at Domain Group. Before I begin, I would just like to acknowledge the Yagara people who are the traditional custodians of the land on which I am joining you from today. And I would like to pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and I extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who are present today. So I know you have just heard from John, who has covered the technical side of GreenPower purchasing in excellent detail. John, I wish I knew all of this in 2020 when we started our journey at Domain. So I'm going to shift gears and speak about our experience in sourcing and implementing GreenPower across several of our offices here at Domain. I know when I have attended previous workshops similar to this, I always find the real world examples quite helpful just to put everything into perspective. So I hope by me sharing Domain's journey, there will be some elements that are in there that you find useful. There will be some time for questions at the end. So if you would like to explore anything I will speak about in further detail, we should be able to do so. So how did GreenPower come about at Domain? As I mentioned before, it all started in early 2020, and it kind of came about from two different angles. Firstly, we are very fortunate to have many passionate employees who work at Domain. So an employee committee was actually formed, which solely focuses on the environment. At the time, we were measuring our scope 1 and 2 emissions, and this environment committee saw an opportunity to reduce these emissions through renewable energy. I also think it's important to call out at this time, there were some conversations happening at a very high level about a potential net zero future. So the committee really leveraged this in championing GreenPower. At the same time, our Domain office over in Perth, their energy contract was set to expire, and it was actually the facilities management firm who approached us with some options to swap to GreenPower instead of re-signing to traditional grid energy options. So I guess this kind of created the perfect opportunity with the committee and the facilities management to approach the relevant executive leaders of the business and just position a shift to green energy. So how did we go about positioning this? And we really leveraged our relationship with our facilities management firm. We're lucky that one management firm covers all of our offices, so they really understood our business. And they provided us with a range of energy options, both traditional grid and GreenPower, but just looking at the Perth office at this stage. And I think that's a really important thing to highlight in our journey. We weren't the experts on the technical details of GreenPower, and by leveraging our relationship with people who are the experts, it really helped us to understand our options in a lot greater detail. I also believe the fact that they included traditional grid energy options in their proposal to us, it was really useful to campaigning for the change internally because it just highlighted the many benefits of GreenPower, both mainly long-term, I should say, but it reduced any concerns about short-term issues, which was mainly around the increased cost. So what did we do with these different options? We presented them all to our CEO, our Chief Financial Officer, and the Chief Sustainability Officer. And ultimately, they decided to use Domain's Perth office as a bit of a test case and transitioned the office to run 50% on renewable and 50% on traditional grid energy for a 1-year period. So after this 1 year, we ultimately deemed it to be a success. Now, what do I mean by this and how did we perceive it to be successful? There are a few elements that went into it. The biggest one was the business. The entire business could see a tangible value in transitioning because the cost actually turned out to be very relative to traditional grid energy. And there was a unforeseen benefit, and that was just the sense of pride from the employees across the entire of Domain to be really working for an organisation that cares and prioritises their environmental impacts. And I guess finally, there was also, a very minimal reduction in our Scope 2 emissions. So following this positive experience, we continued to engage our facilities management firm who assisted us in transitioning to GreenPower in our Melbourne, Sydney and Canberra offices when their existing leases were up. Now, I know I've kind of made it seem like it was all smooth sailing, which for the most part it really was. However, we have also encountered some challenges. So we are currently trying to overcome sourcing issues in our Brisbane and Adelaide offices, as they're both buildings which have an embedded network. Unfortunately, in both cases, building management have not been willing to transition just due to that upfront cost difference. So how are we actually going about overcoming this? We just reached out to all of the other tenants in the buildings and just started to have discussions about GreenPower, from everything about, what it is, what's involved, the benefits. And we also just shared our story with them, which again kind of focused on the benefits of transitioning. We've actually seen a really great success with this method. In Brisbane, there are now a majority of tenants who are interested in switching to GreenPower, which is fantastic. And we have taken this to the building management. And they're actually willing to explore options in 2024 when their current network contract is due to expire. So that is, we think, a fantastic result. For Adelaide, we're having similar success in terms of, the tenants are interested in transitioning. However, there's just a bit of an added layer of a challenge because the space is a co-working space. So we're just kind of working in tandem with the building management and the co-working company to see what our options are moving forward. Now, I know that we all know how many different GreenPower products are out there, different products, retailers, etc. And it can be kind of like daunting. And how do you actually go about selecting the right one? And I think that just brings me back to my earlier point. I think it's just really important to engage with the experts because they were able to find us the different solutions that matched our business needs. And then we were able to take the information they provided us to dig deeper on anything if we wanted to. So I know we looked at things like, were the suppliers that they provided us the right fit for our broader sustainability goals? What was the pricing in comparison with other providers? And then I think the biggest point was, what is the flexibility, if any, in the contract? I know John just touched on it briefly. We really wanted any new power contracts to align with our lease renewal contracts. So, if we wanted to exit the building or whatever it may be, there wasn't like a juxtaposition there with the contract for the energy. So I also thought it might be quite useful for me to highlight what my key learnings from the process was. And I think the biggest one is just really to highlight the benefits of purchasing GreenPower. In our case, it was integral in reducing our emissions, and it was something that we would need to do if we were going to commit to being net zero. There are also benefits beyond the environment, which I think people sometimes forget. For example, we saw our employees have a really great sense of pride to watch the business they work for make positive changes. And there's just also been countless studies which have shown that customers, investors, potential talent are more likely to associate with organisations who are demonstrating their commitment to making a positive impact. Something I've already gone over a few times is just engage with the experts. There are so many different options available to consumers. It can be really challenging to find the best option that suits your business at the business's current point in time. So the experts are there for a reason. Leverage them, and in our case, they really helped us to find the right solutions and also just manage that transition process. I'd also have to say, start your internal engagement early and find your champions. So for Domain, that was our employee environment committee who brought attention to the cause. Also, our office experience lead then played a really key role in managing the relationship with the facilities management. And when we put those two things together, it was the driving force that helped the executive leaders and decision makers see the worth in transitioning. So knowing what I do now, I guess what would my advice be to others who are, at the beginning of their journey? Really build out a great business case, and in that highlight what your drivers are for wanting to switch. So, it could be a financial thing. Sometimes you might find that GreenPower in the long run is actually cheaper. It might be a reputational thing. Do you really want to be seen as a brand that continues to have traditional grid energy? Is it like a means to an end? Do you need to purchase GreenPower to meet any targets that you might have been setting? Or, is it a combination of all of these different factors? Explore all of your options. Make sure that you know your basics, like, the load size, but also just don't forget about the other things like lease considerations. And I guess something that we didn't really encounter, but I know others might, is just don't be afraid to address the cost barrier. Although GreenPower often comes at a bit of a higher price, certain contracting options can actually result in long-term overall lower prices. And I guess if your key internal stakeholders can see that, and the other various benefits of moving to GreenPower, your costs may not even be a barrier. So with that, if there's any questions, I'm happy to attempt to answer them.
That's fantastic. Thanks so much, Sophia. It's really, really inspiring initiative, particularly the aspect there of going and speaking with some of the other tenants. And that's, we've seen that time and time again on all types, right from sort of the GreenPower right through to the PPAs. So fantastic. There is a question here in the chat. From Bronwyn, interested to know how you measured the people pride factor. Was there a survey or other data evidence-based? Yeah, a strong point that she felt.
It was kind of twofold. So it was included in a internal survey that we did. It wasn't specifically a question about, has Domain's GreenPower purchasing made you feel X way? It was kind of like a broader question about, our environmental considerations and impacts. And beyond that, we, through internal messaging systems, have an Ask the Executive Leadership channel. And there was just a lot of comments coming through there of employees just sharing how excited they were that we've made the change, which was really great to see that they felt they could express how they were feeling about it.
That's fantastic. Thanks very much. We're right on time now. I don't know if anyone has another final quick question for Sophia.
I thought it was great, Sophia, Jonathan, how you mentioned that comparing it with traditional suppliers was a sort of a real key to success. I can imagine if you're kind of saying to your executive or your director of finance, oh, this is going to be $10,000 a year more, that's hard to get support from. But if you say, hey, Black Power is 100,000 and GreenPower and being renewables is 105 or 110, it's less of a difference in that context. And is it that kind of that illustrate how you positioned it to get that over the line?
Yeah, exactly. So not only did we look at it just from like a basic cost perspective, we started to factor in all of those other studies that had been done. So, we kind of said, hey, we might be spending $10,000 less, but that's actually impacting us through potential passive investment, employee attraction. So we just tried to use some other factors that weren't necessarily financial.
It's kind of a soft, oh, sorry, I'm jumping in rudely there, but some of the really larger companies, sort of take that step further. The mining companies, etc., looking at having an internal carbon price, but essentially you're doing that by quantifying to a degree what some of those benefits you might be missing out on if you don't switch to GreenPower.
Absolutely.
I remember someone BRCA was helping. They were going through this, and we sort of briefed him, and then 2 weeks later he came back and he'd gotten 3 quotes, and all of them were cheaper than their current providers. So he just slipped GreenPower in under the previous budget. So it speaks to that opportunity that you were mentioning earlier.
There's another quick question here, and then we might have to wrap up. Sophia, Annie asks, how did you go about approaching other businesses within your building, and how did you communicate with them moving forward?
So for both buildings, Brisbane and Adelaide, we kind of spoke to the building management and asked if they would be willing to, you know, provide us some of the key contacts from each different floor or, you know, department that was renting out a space. And from there, we just went via email. We kind of kept it quite broad just to understand their appetite and, you know, what kind of position they were at in their journey. And then from there, we really just leverage how they would have liked to progress. So, you know, for some, it was purely just email communication. Others, we did like quick coffee catch-ups where, you know, it was a little bit more personal. And then as everything started to gather momentum, we kind of just held like a bit of a Zoom call where we all sat down and we talked about it in depth with everyone. And it was kind of like a round table. So yeah, that's how we kind of went about it.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Sophia. There's a question there. What do you think of certified carbon neutral power? I think that might be a more general question for us to perhaps address a little bit later, unless you have a particular view. But yeah, we might just move on now anyway, just to get to that next session. But everyone virtually applaud and say thank you, please, to Sophia for joining us today and sharing her story from Domain. It's much more real than lots of applause there. Fantastic. I couldn't find the button. Well done. So just handing back now to Jonathan to move to our business case session. Take it away, Jonathan.
Thanks so much, Jackie. And wasn't it great to hear Sophia talk to some of the why points we mentioned earlier, and also about the business case. So it's great that this next session now speaks particularly to that. And we're just going to have a few minutes of slides where I introduce the topic, and then we're going to go to breakout rooms. And there'll be someone from City of Sydney or Business Renewables Centre in each of those. And we're going to just collaborate together to work through the starting of a business case. We're also providing a template business case in time as well for your use. And Sarah mentioned earlier that complexity was a barrier, and part of this is trying to help reduce or remove those barriers for you to switch to renewables. So in the group activity for your organisation, to consider and discuss the answers to the questions in the template A workbook, and to establish the basis for the GreenPower or LGC procurement. This provides the basis for building the business case, and the questions are: what are the key drivers for our organisation to switch to renewable electricity? Sophia talked to some of theirs, and staff engagement was one that came up as well. Who are the main internal stakeholders interested in our switch to renewables, and who are the key decision makers? In terms of stakeholders, as Sophia mentioned, you might find a champion. You've got your key people that have to sign the final approval paper and also contracts. You can also have someone outside that is a gatekeeper who will insert themselves in the process and be dissatisfied until they're satisfied to influence sort of your pathway and final outcome. There is a technical part. We have to know our baseline, as Sophia mentioned. How much electricity do we use? Is it all in one state, or is it more in one state and some in other states? And we want to collaborate on what the next steps are. I think that's it, isn't it, to go into the group activity?
That's right. So I think Jade and Alex are going to enable us to join groups now, and you'll each have a facilitator, as Jonathan mentioned, and someone will act as scribe.
Should we go around the rooms? Would you like to lead, Jackie?
Yeah, absolutely. And please, my group, if you want to join in and comment. I won't identify your companies exactly just to protect you, but we actually the first one for the first question. So we talked about key drivers, some really interesting challenges around refrigeration, not just your average sort of lights on, lights off type organisations. And that obviously sustainability more broadly for some of these organisations, they've got a number of initiatives, and this is obviously one of them. But you know, when you don't have many peers, but are still wanting to lead the way, which is admirable. We had a number of we had some professional services organisations with offices all over Australia with those sort of science-based target net zero reduction targets. So those targets coming through as key drivers, but also walking the talk. So when they're providing advice to their clients, saying yes, we are doing what we're also recommending you do when we're providing our advice to you through our designs and engineering work. We had a council, again, a net zero future regarding not only council's operations, but also community. So extending out that net zero goal to the broader community. And then finally, we spoke to a government department that deals with property, also a net zero target of the New South Wales government 2050 and money saved there. So really interesting sort of, you know, looking for those genuine sort of opportunities to change to renewables. Thank you. Would you like to go next? Or I can, we did actually just get through one other question, which was the main internal stakeholders, which really varied from obviously facilities managers and operations directors, CEOs, CFOs, board of directors for sort of tenant-based arrangements and those sorts of things. So I'll hand back to you, JP, and you can talk to your team.
Yeah, is Nadoka able to speak and talk back on what our group went through?
I can.
You can.
Can everyone hear me?
Loud and clear.
Great. Let me just get our notes up. We had a really interesting group because I think we had a mix of different types of organizations. So we could look at, I suppose, large scale or a large organization's perspective, as well as a smaller organization's perspective. And so for the key drivers, we talked about things like pricing security. And there was an organization that had done an internal organizational survey, and that was a big driver. So there was like a weighting on those responses, and out of that, the organization decided that they wanted to make a modest contribution to GreenPower and switch to net zero. So that's how they've moved forward. For others, there's like a global organizational target that has some more of a top-down approach, which means that for their operations in Australia, they're looking to switch to 100% renewables here. And then there were other motivations, like they want to be seen as an industry leader for their clients as well. And then for the main internal stakeholders, we had quite a wide range. So for the global operations organization, they have an internal ESG team, which consisted of operations manager, finance manager, and again, coming from like a global directive. There were also people like procurement. So we had one person in our group who was from the procurement team, and they were responsible for running the process and putting the business case together. Other people identified were people like CEOs, finance teams, and engineers, which were particularly relevant for organizations like a council. And the last one was board and shareholders. And we were talking about different perspectives on those roles for listed and unlisted organizations. And then we only had like a few minutes left, so we kind of rushed the last two questions. But in terms of electricity consumption, we had big energy users actually, ranging from 2,000 megawatt hours to 1.5 megawatt hours. So there was quite a big range. And then in terms of next steps, a bit of a varied response. So some organizations were going to be trading off LGCs for the next 12 months and then PPAs for the next 7 to 10 years. So figuring out what the business case is for there. And then others were looking to have strategic alignment internally. So particularly realizing what are the opportunities and constraints, including embedded networks, other opportunities to discuss with other tenants, and how cost effective all that is. And that was our group.
Great.
Fantastic.
Thanks, oh,
Thanks,
sorry, Jackie.
thanks, Nadoka. Please go on, Alex, hop in now.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I might just provide a quick summary of my group as well. So I think one thing that was pretty clear, and we've captured that in the bias diagnostic tool, is that, you know, it is mostly this dichotomy of sustainability commitments being a key driver, and really on a different kind of way of viewing it is the consumer demand for these commitments. So it's one being the actual thing and the other thing being the driver for the driver, which you thought was a very interesting point. In terms of the stakeholders that are kind of invested in this, so we had our sustainability team, you know, as more organizations have the capacity to have that ability to do that, you could see that renewable energy is going to just become like higher on their priority list, and the CFO as well. One key like benefit for small organizations is that chain of communication is smaller and a lot more direct and concise. And so I think it's easy to overlook the real benefit of you bringing your whole team along. And so that was something that was touched on there. In terms of annual usage of electricity, so another interesting point is that when you are kind of doing these, when you're procuring these LGCs and GreenPower, it is interesting to note that, you know, people forecast for expanded load. So you might be a small energy user now, but in the future you might not. And so allowing for that bit of thinking ahead of time and a bit of that flexibility when you do decide to procure renewably, that's also something that you should just have at the back of your mind. And so, yeah, in terms of the next steps, it was a lot about just guidance for more information, or, you know, using the tool that we mentioned before, or even just talking internally and taking all that know-how that you've gained through the sessions and just applying that and just really getting that ball rolling on discussion. And so, yeah, I might pass over to you, Jackie, to take us to the next activity. Oh, Jackie, you're on mute. Or have I disconnected? JP, are you there?
I'm there, and I can take it onto the next slide.
Beautiful, thank you.
So the good news is we're on the home straight. We just have a couple more quick sessions around building case, and then chances for some, it's like 10-minute space for questions and answers. So if you have any questions, any pertinent things in your mind, please start putting them in the chat so we can get to them at the end. In terms of the building case, we're supplying a template. For some of you, you do business cases all the time and don't need much help, or you might get oh, that's a good line, or that's a good set out from our template. And for others that don't do business cases regularly, we hope that it's very helpful that we've kind of written one for you. It's just using sample numbers, so you really have to put your own details in there. The set out, we agree, we think, sharing the business case template again. Alex, would you like to do that?
Yep. Sorry, JP. Could you repeat that? It glitched out a bit.
No, I think that's fine. So the typical sections that we have in mind: objectives and background, a cost comparison, maybe some commentary on the energy market, future energy costs, and also the strategic opportunity, the benefits of going renewables. In terms of objectives and background, we think that for decision makers, they'll probably want this detail of how much are we currently spending, what's happening in the industry, why should we do it and why now? It's always tempting to say, oh, we'll do this in a couple of years. And we have spoken a bit about knowing your portfolio. How many sites do you have? Sites is a bit of an energy term, but that's how we call it. How many meters or sites do you have, in what states, and how much do they use annually? The reason it is a bit technical, and the reason we mention it is once you go to get quotes, those retailers will ask for it. And then if you go to get quotes and suddenly you have to scurry around to find that information, it might delay you a few weeks. Secondly, you get more competitive quotes the more details you provide in this context. Where are your sites? How much energy do they use annually, and so on? So it's really beneficial, and also to include it in this business case. Cost comparison, we discussed about Sophia's experience, not just saying it will cost X more, but saying here are some quotes from traditional black power from the grid, and here are GreenPower offers side by side. And in that context, if it's only 3%, 5%, 10% more, that may be considered beneficial due to all the benefits it's going to provide, or by having a more competitive process and maybe contracting for 2 or 3 years rather than a rolling contract, it might turn out that GreenPower is the same or even cheaper. So including that cost comparison. As I mentioned, looking forward, if you're in New South Wales, coal power stations are retiring very quickly over the coming years, so it's good to become more active in managing your retailing and your energy costs and so on. And strategic opportunities, so speaking to that, why are your peers doing it? Are your staff calling for it, your shareholders, and other things like that? So all good details to include in a business case. Due to time, we'll roll through these slides pretty quick. So as I mentioned, get your questions in. So next steps, we really want to support all of you attending today to make this easier, providing you with a baseline of knowledge and some tools that you can take action. And this is all about taking action. So next steps is understanding your electricity use, as I mentioned. As Sophia mentioned, start that internal stakeholder management and engagement early. Find out what their drivers are, who's going to make the decisions, who's going to be a champion, who might insert themselves to hold you up. Step 3, gather expertise, peers, Business Renewables Centre, City Switch, and so on. People you can call upon for tips and market updates along the way. I'm not sure we're going to share Sophia's email address, but wouldn't she be great to call upon on those tricky phases when you get stuck somewhere? Download the business case template and start preparing it. The subsequent steps will enable you to add that required information to complete it. Remember to consider who will sign off. Thank you, Alex. What information are they seeking? What are the questions they might have? What are the key factors that may influence them in their decision? How to choose. So we've spoken of different options, but how do you make your choice? Coupled GreenPower is the simplest and easiest, and that's what GreenPower is set up to be. You just switch to a GreenPower retailer. I think there's over 30 or 40 of them. Get a quotes from preferred three or 5, and sign up with them. Decoupled GreenPower is for those. GreenPower has that benefit of an extra layer of accreditation. There's 1 or 3 organisations that can provide it separate to your electricity contract. That might be beneficial if you're in an embedded network as a tenant, or you want to do it centrally for all states, or maybe procurement want to keep managing electricity purchasing and you want to do your environmental initiatives separately. Separately, we talked about LGCs. You can do this annually or enter into a longer term contract. It's beneficial if you have those resources internally and interest to more actively manage your LGCs and get more control of it. You can even end up with more tangibility that they're directly coming from a particular solar farm or wind farm, and in your comms and marketing, you can add in communications about the solar farm or wind farm that they're coming from.
And it's just important to add there, as we've mentioned before, obviously there are power purchase agreements as well, which have a whole bunch of other features and benefits to have a look at. So if you are sort of on that larger side in terms of your electricity usage, definitely worth joining those sessions, at least the first session, to see if it's for you, coming up in a couple of weeks. JP.
Great. Next slide. Thanks, Alex. So now on to questions and answers. So we've got a bit of time, which is great. Today we've shown you the key reasons your organisation might choose to buy off-site renewable energy, key features of the two main renewable energy purchase options for small energy buyers, how to procure for your company, and how to build a business case for that purchase. So what's next? Don't forget to use the buyer's diagnostic tool and get some free resources from us. We also have two other streams. So there were some questions about how to register for the retail PPAs and to get in touch with Business Renewables Centre for more information.
That's right.
Jackie, Melanie asked for the business case template. When are we due to send that out to today's participants? Is that in the coming weeks?
I believe that should have gone out today. Jade, I believe, may have already sent out that workbook package, but Jade, you might just want to confirm the timing.
Yeah, thanks, Jackie. So we'll be sending that around after today's workshop to everyone who attended, and this resources will also be available on the City Switch website.
Great. And if you've got any questions about the content, please feel free to get in touch and we can take you through some of that. Any other questions? We had a hot flow of questions earlier, so maybe we need to bring up. Yes, go on.
Nick asked, what's the difference between LGCs and carbon offsets? So in some ways they're similar. They're a tradable certificate representing an environmental attribute. LGCs are just for large-scale renewables in Australia. Globally, they're called renewable energy certificates, and they're tied to 1 megawatt hour of renewable electricity generation, generally by wind or solar farms. My favourite renewable energy certificate is the ones in Taiwan. They're called T-Rex. So that's got a great name. Carbon offsets are similar. They're I got a laugh emoji. Haven't seen that before. So carbon offsets are similar. They equate to a tonne of carbon abated, and they're generated by carbon offset projects like planting of new trees or reserving of forests that would otherwise be cut down, and other initiatives like that. And they go in through a very detailed carbon methodology about how many tonnes that project will produce, and they can sell those offsets. So similar. In terms of how you use them, generally good practice is your scope 1 emissions. If you can't eliminate them, like switching, say, from a gas boiler to an electric heat pump, for instance, or a petrol car to an EV, then you can use offsets for scope 1 emissions. And then good practice is to use LGCs for your scope 2 emissions, which is your emissions due to your electricity usage. That doesn't have to always be the case and 100% for both, but that's generally how it's done. I quite like LGCs in that the priority in Australia, a very coal-dependent grid, is to boost renewables, generate more power from renewables and burn less coal. So LGCs have a very strong case in Australia. And whilst planting trees and protecting biodiversity is obviously also crucial, a more pertinent thing in Australia is to decrease our reliance on burning coal and gas for our electricity generation. Hopefully that provides some context for the answer. It's not a simple 0 or 1, Nick, but hopefully that explains the answer to that question.
And I guess the simplest way to sum that up is renewable energy certificates like LGCs can really only be used for your electricity, the scope 2 component, whereas carbon offsets can be used for all 3 scopes.
And I might just jump in as well. So we have a question in the Q&A, which might have been directed to Sophia, but Jackie and JP, I'm hoping you can provide some tips on it. So the question is, which FM company manages your tenancies and which consultants did you use?
Yes, that does sound like it was a question for Sophia. I'm not sure if Sophia's still on the line.
I think she might have dropped off.
Popped off. That's okay. Yeah, look, if you want to email that question through perhaps to the City of Sydney, they may be able to send that question through to her and she might be happy to respond to that. Obviously, there's a whole lot of different consultants, etc. out there. We've got lists of consultants on our website, on our public site, which you can have a look at as well. We're pretty much both solution and consultant agnostic at BRC. Any other questions? Question there from Jade. Anyone have experience with similar tenancy arrangement to Sophia's?
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of echo a few things that I'd seen on the chat. After the breakout rooms, asked for people to report back anything that hadn't been counted already. And we had one comment from Annie saying that their group spoke a lot about the next steps, and someone shared that they found it really difficult to find a broker that had market knowledge in this area. And as you know, that's why we're trying to provide this information today. But do you have any, and similarly, comment about, does anyone have any tenancy arrangement similar to Sophia's? There's so many barriers that can be put up for businesses who want to do the right thing. So do you have any tips for how people here today can make it easy for themselves after they leave and maybe not be discouraged if it's still difficult to find someone with good knowledge out there?
Yeah, look, I think, have a look at those lists of consultants. They're on the more carbon side, you've obviously got the climate active certified consultants. On renewable, we more list sort of renewable energy consultants. A lot of those have crossed over into providing support for organisations on the whole carbon piece, which makes life easier as a client because you can get the all-in-one. You don't have to have a necessarily separate energy and carbon consultants. We've got quite a lot of information on our website as well that you can jump in. I might actually just quickly jump to that next slide. Just again, if you want to have a little look at what we've got on our website, we've got a number of free resources on there. Some of the resources are for members. So if you're interested in any of those, you can see what they are on the website. Just have a little look around. For GreenPower, obviously going to the GreenPower program, there's quite a good guide that was put out a few years ago by the 100% Renewables consultancy called A Guide to GreenPower for Business, quite easy to Google. A bunch of other resources out there. Just, basically, I guess what we would recommend is having these conversations with as many organisations as you can, and doing that research that really makes sure that you get a good result. When you go to tender, we do recommend you go to tender rather than just asking definitely invite your current electricity retailer, to provide a price on these things, but go a bit broader. There are a lot of organisations, a lot of retailers out there now. They've all got obviously slightly different contract terms, but it's certainly worth having a look at what the market has to offer beyond what you're already receiving. We'd recommend that from GreenPower right through to retail PPAs and firming.
And we have another question. Sorry, JP, I might have beat you to the end there, but so the question is, how do you guarantee that the energy is not being double counted in the physical energy and the energy attributes?
Indeed, that's why renewable energy certificates are set up and why GreenPower exists. A major part of GreenPower's role is to ensure there's no double counting. For example, Energy Co, as a nameless energy company, doesn't tell 10 customers they're all renewable, but only buy enough renewable energy certificates for one of them, is one instance, and sell off the rest of their renewable energy certificates back into the market. So GreenPower is there to ensure if the energy company, the retailer, is saying they've got this many GreenPower customers and they're all paying for it, they are buying enough renewable energy certificates to cover all those customers. That's also the beauty of LGCs and having your own control. You get to see each LGC. It's highly regulated. When a solar or wind farm generates power, the number of renewable energy certificates it creates and gets transferred from the clean energy regulator, and then they transfer them to you directly, so you can directly account for that. So there's two ways that's being ensured. To answer your question, one is GreenPower play that role as a creditor, or buying LGCs directly, where you get to see the certificates and know how many have been surrendered, and so there's no double counting.
Great. I think, Francisco, that might take care of your question there, I believe. Yes, we have Anya from GreenPower on the line as well. So obviously, if you have any questions, Anya would be absolutely happy to help you answer some of those. Any other final questions in these last couple of minutes? Everyone's probably quite tired. It's been a fairly intense couple of hours. As Jade mentions, we do have the slides will go out, and obviously the recording will be available. You can go back and laugh at Jonathan's joke about T-Rex again. Obviously, if you do have any other questions, I think Alison has popped through a question there. Are you able to confirm whether GreenPower meets science-based targets criteria for renewable energy? I don't know whether or not Anya is able to answer this question on this call. Anya, if you are able to, please feel free to type it into the message or unmute yourself if you're able.
Yeah, hey, I actually can. Hi everyone.
Great,
sorry,
fabulous.
I was late. I thought the presentation was tonight. But yes, so because GreenPower is actually recognized and even mentioned in the Scope 2 guidance from the World Resource Institute, and RE100, SBTI, B Corp, NABERS, they're all referring and recognizing that guidance. Therefore, we are recognized as a legit way to reduce your Scope 2 emissions.
Fantastic. Thanks very much for that, Anya. And I think that's just about it, unless anyone else has a final burning question. Here we go. I think Alison has asked, and Anya, does the same apply for LGCs bought separately?
Yes, if you have a way to prove it, that you surrender those LGCs. So if you buy GreenPower, the advantage is that we do all the auditing and the confirmation, and all these certification bodies like SBTI and RE100 know that we do this. So, all you have to show is your invoice or your electricity purchase for GreenPower. Whereas if you purchase and self-surrender LGCs, then you need to have a look what the requirements are from SBTI, for example, to prove that you self-surrendered them. But yes, they would be counting similarly. One other requirement to think about is which might not be the audience right now, but if you're looking for RE100, they're introducing some more requirements on where the LGCs can be sourced from in terms of generator age and how old they can be, which comes into effect 2024. So you just have to make sure that you meet these requirements. We at GreenPower at the moment are working towards always ensuring that we're best practice. And if you buy GreenPower, then you don't have to worry if it gets recognized by those organizations.
That's great. Thank you, Anya. And it's great to have you on the line. And there's another question here from Timothy. He's asked for a list of brokers. I've just posted now on the chat a link to our service provider profiles, which is more broadly for renewable energy procurement, so all the types that we talk about. And for GreenPower, Anya may be able to provide some guidance there with regards to brokers. Obviously, retailers are brokers as well, electricity retailers, but Anya.
Yeah,
Maybe you can answer.
Sorry, I didn't mean to take over the call. Like, feel free,
No.
anyone also, to get in touch with us anytime. At the moment on our website, we just list providers, which some of them are certificate brokers that are accredited under the GreenPower program because they're audited by us. When it comes to general certificate brokers, we have no insight into what they're doing. But yeah, maybe the BRCA might be the better place so they have sort of better overview of the market as well, who might be out there.
Probably a mix of our information and yours. And yeah, definitely shop around to understand who has that best knowledge. But yeah, we're very happy to chat to you if you've got any more questions about that. We've just hit 3 o'clock, and I just want to mention that Jonathan has had a very sore throat today and did extremely well to get through speaking for so long. Thanks very much, JP. And handing now back to Jade.
Thanks so much, Jackie and Jonathan and Alex, for providing all the amazing tech support today. I think there's not much more to say. You'll all receive the resources from today and links that have been mentioned. Thanks again to Anya for coming in at the most perfect minute to provide us with all those additional answers. Please share your success stories with us. We'd love to see how you all go with switching, and make sure to check out the other classes in the Masterclass series on PPAs if that's appropriate for your organisation. The link will also be sent out for that. Have a lovely day, everyone.